Okay. Well, now we're going to talk about weird stuff. Great. Whenever I have to talk about sexual deviance, sexual stuff within the capacity of a lecture, it's difficult for me. Okay? I don't know why. It's just these days you have to toe such a fine line. And when you're talking about sexual deviance and paraphilias, you have to be an acrobat. And those of you who know me, it's difficult for me to be a verbal acrobat. But I will try. We'll try to keep it totes profesh. Okay. All right. So, those of you who don't know what deviance means by now, deviance means not normal. Right? So sexual deviance can be sexual things that people do or are into that most people don't do or are into. And some of those deviant sexual acts might be illegal, some of them might not. Some people might every now and then engage in some sexual deviance. Other people engage in it so much that it disrupts their lives. But one thing that we do know is that not all, but many serial killers do have some weird sexual deviant side. And so it's important, if we're going to make sense of some of the victims that have been found, or some of the serial killer victims, it is important to understand where that behavior came from, right? So what did the serial killer see in that victim? Why was that particular victim a suitable target other than just accessibility, right? One thing we do know is like that prostitutes or people who, because of their lifestyle, try to avoid the police are often the victims of violent crimes. But, someone like the BTK killer, he was very, very selective in terms of the people he wanted to kill, similar to Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Kemper, and all of them had some sexual aspect to it. And so we're going to discuss, there are many paraphilias, there are many sexual deviant acts, but we're going to talk about some of the more important ones associated with killing and or serial killing. Okay, again, the clicking thing, it doesn't freaking click. Oi, okay, here we go, okay. So what is a paraphilia? Well, so the DSM-5, or DSMV, however you want to pronounce it, gives you a pretty much very long but all-inclusive academic definition of what a paraphilia is. It's essentially sexual deviance that lasts for longer than 6 months. So something that you really get into and it becomes a part of your sexual identity, or not sexual identity, but sexual practice. But the most important thing is that it disrupts your life, okay? And oftentimes these paraphilias can mean harm to your subjects, but not always, because in some cases a paraphilia, the person might not know they're being watched or something. Or the person might already be dead. And we're going to talk about necrophilia here in a little bit. But philia is the key word. That usually whenever you hear like philia or philly or phili, phila, whatever, that has to do with sexual stuff, okay? So pedophilia, necrophilia, there's all kinds of other philias in the book that you can look at yourself. But you might be like, okay. Every now and then, my partner and I will get some, I don't know, let's not get too weird, but every now and then I try to spice things up in my own relationship. Does that mean I have a paraphilia? No. Every now and then I like to go on the internet and look at some weird pictures of certain types of people, but it's nothing crazy, just every now and then. Do I have a paraphilia? No. So here's the deal. So you have 3 categories here. You have kinks, fetishes and paraphilias. And I'd say that kinks and fetishes are pretty normal. Everyone has their own thing that they're into, and that's good for you. A kink is when you do something non-traditional every now and then to spice things up, and then you revert back to your normal thing. So the most common thing, the most common kink that we know about is role playing, right? So two, three, four, whatever the throuple people might decide, hey, tonight it's Friday night. The kid is over at grandma and grandpa's. We have the house to ourselves. Let's do a role playing thing where this person plays this role and this person plays this role, and that's a kink, right? Another kind of popular kink is to bring another person into the mix temporarily, right? Okay. That's fine, but the thing is you have your normal way of having your traditional sexual activity, and then every now and then you just spice it up because you feel like a little bit of change. It's like you eat a pretty consistent diet throughout your life, especially when you get older. You'll see. But every Friday night you want to get a pizza. No big deal, right? That's what we do in my house. Every Friday night we order pizza, and it is a Thursday today, and I am excited about the pizza we're going to get tomorrow. Although it's only going to be Papa John's, it's not going to be like crazy awesome pizza. But Papa John's, the reason why I like Papa John's, it's not that bad, and you get a lot for the price. So our daughter is 2 years old, so she likes to just pick toppings off the pizza and kind of just destroy it. So it's good for that. I'm definitely going to get pineapple on the pizza. Yes, pineapple. I don't care. Now that's the thing. A fetish is when certain kinks, certain things that are non-traditional are an important factor in getting you turned on, right? So let's use pizza, okay? For crying out loud. Pineapple is a sort of contested aspect on pizza. All right, so most people eat cheese or pepperoni pizza all the time, and then maybe once in a while they'll kink it up with a little bit of pineapple. A fetish would be as if I have to have pineapple on my pizza every single time. Otherwise, I'm not eating the pizza. And that is exactly where I am with pizza, by the way. What is the point of pizza if there's not pineapple on it? Okay? I know, I'm weird. I don't care. This is America. But just think about a fetish that you get so... okay, here's a different one. Okay, here's a different one. All right, so every now and then you're like, oh, foot. Cool, great, do some stuff with a foot. All right, then usually you revert back to your normal thing. Kink. Because usually you're like, oh yeah, that's like a thing, right? Let's try that for once, right? A fetish is, hey, every time we're having our sexual activity, there needs to be a foot situation in there too. Otherwise, I'm not having it. A paraphilia is when you go up to like people who don't know, you are looking at them, you're taking pictures of their feet, or you touch someone's foot without their consent, or you let that fetish take over so much of your life that it starts to disrupt your day-to-day life and aspirations and goals, and has negative consequences for you or others. I hope that makes sense. Ugh. Okay, so one type of paraphilia is pedophilia. And those of you are like, oh yeah, I know what pedophilia is. Yeah, a pedophile. And this is one thing we do often. We often use the term pedophile and child molester and someone who's into teenage people. We use those terms interchangeably, but the true definition of someone who is a pedophile is someone who is attracted sexually to prepubescent human beings. So a person who looks like a child. You have to be turned on by someone who looks nothing like an adult, right? So those creepy dudes that hang out at like high schools and stuff, right? Like at my church, for instance, there was this dude who he was like in his 20s. He was dating some girl who was this is my previous church, who was 16, and he had he had like consent from the parents, and I'm like, well, did you get consent from her? But nonetheless, right? So people who are like in a completely different social group, a social strata, and now they are dating someone who's in high school, that's a teenager, still a child, right? That is creepy, but not pedophilia. But if that person who they're dating, the person they're victimizing, doesn't have adult-like features, then it is pedophilia. Moreover, not all pedophiles are child molesters. Did you know that? About 5% of men are pedophiles. But not 5% of men actually molest children. No, there's actually many, many pedophiles who don't actually molest children because they know that it might not be a good look for them. The child might not know what they're getting themselves into. So just because someone is a pedophile doesn't make them a child molester. But most child molesters are also pedophiles. Many child molesters who end up killing their victims kill the victims for instrumental reasons, meaning that they've now molested a child. The child doesn't know what the hell just happened to them, and they know, the molester knows they will get in trouble if they let that child go. So they're not killing the child necessarily because they want the child to die. They're killing the child to protect themselves, which is quite upsetting, right? You would likely have to be some sort of a psychopath or sociopath to bring yourself to kill a child after just using them for sexual reasons. I mean, yeah, and the most important thing to know about pedophiles is that many pedophiles experience some victimization themselves early on in their formation. And this is a recurrent theme, right? There seems to be something about the early life of the serial killer that really just disrupts their trajectory. And this is really why these life course theories are really good to explain pedophilia and serial killing and some of these really specific crimes. So, I mean, think about it for a second, though, right? So, if many pedophiles received some sort of a victimization themselves in their childhood, you can almost imagine, like, think about your own sexual development, right? And So we all go through certain stages, right? So the traditional sexual development for a person in America in our time would be that around, like, I'd say, like in your early childhood, you might have a friend from daycare or preschool, or even like, first couple of years of elementary school, just give you like a little peck on the lips or on the cheek, and that's what it is, right? I remember when I was in the first grade, there was this girl came over, she hung out at my house, and she's like, hey, we should give each other a kiss. And I was like, all right, boom. Nothing big, that was it, right? Everyone has some sort of an experience like that during that time of their lives. Then when you start approaching puberty, right? So now we're talking 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, around there, right? You begin to learn as people are developing, right? You notice, oh, whoa, this dude all of a sudden got a mustache, or hey, this woman finally is developing. And so you normally start to ask these questions, become interested in sexual activity, and then it's usually around your middle school years, maybe beginning freshman year, where you really kiss someone for the first time. You go to that what people refer to as first base, right? You make out with someone, and then you learn that making out is not just shoving your tongue in someone's mouth, but that there's an actual art to it, right? I remember some of the first times I've ever kissed someone like that. There was a lot of variety in the amount of skill that people had. Then you know, and what often happens is, right, like you have your friends, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I made out with this person, blah, blah, blah. And your friends are like, oh, dude, did you go to second base? And you're like, no, what's second base? And then I tell you what second base is. You're like, what? There's a whole other thing to this. And then when you feel, when you're in the right, when you feel comfortable with it, you move to that second base. Obviously, if the other person consents. And then there's third base, and then you finally have sexual intercourse. And that can usually happen towards the end of high school, middle high school, or even or college, or, some people believe in not having sex before marriage, and so they get married very young or something, I don't know. But nonetheless, so, and then you get to that sort of your first real sexual relationship, right, where you are with someone who you're very passionate about, and where the conversation about sexual activity is very open, right? And so you sort of have that experience, and this is usually right at the end of high school, towards college, maybe even a little further on, maybe your early 20s, where you learn, you come out of your shell sexually, and it's usually with one partner, and then you sort of figure out who you are within that context, right? And that I would characterize as the normal sexual development of an American person in our day and age. A pedophile, just think about it for a second, right? So most of us who are listening to this video had a somewhat similar sexual development as to what I just described. But with a pedophile, usually very early on, when you're in those early formative years where you're learning about maybe, giving someone a peck on the cheek for the first time, or you still think that sort of, oh, cooties, right? And then all of a sudden, this older person pulls your pants down and starts to touch you. You might know that what's happening is not normal or not right, but it sets a tone. I mean, that's got to be quite disruptive to how you think sexual activity is supposed to work and what you think is normal. Some people use, there are many ways to explain the process. Some people think that the trauma causes people to fixate on that, and so when they get older, they think they should do that. Other people think it's more of a rational thing where people are just like, oh, okay, no, it's normal, right? Like it's sort of like it's like a rite of passage, right? Like, I was molested, so I do the same thing to someone, right? Other people just, when something like that happens to them, it just puts them on pause, right? If something traumatic like that happens to you, it puts your whole developmental schedule on pause. You get stuck, right? But you're still growing. The people around you are also still growing, and they're developing. And next thing you know, you're nothing that they're doing makes sense to you. But you know that for some reason people expect you to be doing what they're doing, but you don't get it. So it's like this vicious cycle, right? It's kind of like, think about it like this. you listening to this video right now, how many times have you zoned out of this video and then you're like, oh shit, I'm listening to this video, and then you come back and you're like, what is he talking about now? First of all, he was talking about like pizza, and now he's talking about child molestation. What? How did we get there? Right? It's sort of the same in that trauma happens to you. It's like this disruption in your sexual development, and for some people it turns into pedophilia. They don't know how to act. They don't know what to do. But for some reason, prepubescent children is what turns them on. Another thing that's important from understanding, another paraphilia that's important in terms of understanding serial killing is necrophilia. And necrophilia really has this spectrum which is sort of not so bad, which is taphophilia. Is that how you say it? Taphophilia? Whatever. Where you just sort of love the idea of death and cemeteries and funerals, and you just love to be around people who are grieving, love to be around people that are dying, and that does a sexual thing for you. Like, it turns you on. Who came up with these names? Then you have agalmatophilia, agalmatophilia. That sounds right. That's where you're into like mannequins and stuff, and I think the BTK killer was into that. We're not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure. But you're into stuff that appears dead. Things that appear lifeless. Somophilia is where you like to watch people sleep and it turns you on, right? And this is where you start like some people might get into that for like a second, right? But when your wife is sleeping and you're just standing there and watching her being aroused with her sleeping, that can't be normal. That must be disruptive to your life. Then you have pseudonecrophilia, which is sort of like a big jump from watching people sleep to having sex with dead people that you find. And interestingly, just the other day, there was a case of this person that was arrested. I think, was it in Georgia? A woman had died from outside of a homeless shelter, and the police arrived to find another person having sex with a dead body, and what they ended up determining was that the person came walking by, saw the dead body, and found that opportunity to have sex with them. Right? You might find this sometimes with at some funeral homes or hospitals or whatever. Then you have partialism, where people like to have sex with certain dead bodies. So like dead feet, dead hands, dead mouth. So Ed Kemper, he said one thing that he enjoyed to do was to cut. I know that he at least did it once, that he cut someone's head off, and then he had sex with the throat from the inside of the throat. So like if you were to cut the head off, right, and you look at where the head's been cut off, so you take the head off, right, and now you're looking into the sort of the cross section of the neck, and there's a trachea hole, and so he would have sex with that. If you watch Mindhunter, they show the guy does a really good rendition of the original interview. I mean, there's a little bit of fluff added to it, obviously, with Ed Kemper, and he actually explains that. It's kind of gross. Then you get people like Ted Bundy, and I think also Jeffrey Dahmer, who would kill people so that they can have sex with their bodies. Right? So there might be some stalking involved. There might be a little more selection involved, a little more thinking, a little more trying to figure out, well, what am I going for here? Right? And then you get the necrosadism, right? So you go from people who like to go to funerals and be around death to people who kill people and then they mutilate the body, like Ed Kemper, to get sexual arousal, right? Like Ed Kemper was savage, and he would Not savage as in like the cool term. Like, you know, when people are like, oh, dude, that guy was savage. What a savage comeback. No, as in like savage, as in like what it actually means. Would mutilate corpses and have sex with parts of the body, or would just get joy from the fact that you're turning this body that used to be a person, right? So think about that for a second, right? So a person is a person, right? And then they die, and it's like they become less of a person because I don't know if you've ever been around dead bodies, but it's sort of like, oh, okay, so it turns from this thing that's alive to this thing that's inanimate and definitely dead, and it's just like the shell, right? But there's still but you still can, it's still reminiscent of that person that used to be there. But once you mutilate a body enough, it is just meat, right? It's kind of like, I don't know if any of you have ever gone hunting, but you see the deer alive and you kill it, and then you drain the blood from it, and then you field dress it, right? And then you cut the head off, and then you take the skin off, and next thing you know, you forget that it's even, it was even a live deer. And to be honest, and what's interesting and kind of creepy, so when you're butchering a deer, like for me at least, like it's kind of gross at first. I'm like, oh, here's this freaking dead thing now, and you take out the guts, and you're like, ugh, and it's kind of gross. But then like once the skin's off and the head's cut off and like the legs are cut off, and you're just sort of with the carcass with all the yummy meat on it, and you start flaying it and cutting the tenderloin out, you start getting like your mouth starts watering. And it's weird how you go from the one feeling of almost being a little grossed out to being hungry in like 2 hours. But yeah, that's mutilation. And some people get sexual arousal from that. All right. So another important form of paraphilia associated with serial killing is rape or sexual assault. The main thing with many paraphilias, but especially with rape and sexual assault, is when there is no consent. And rapists, for the most part, are either ambivalent to or are aroused by the fact that there is no consent. So they might either be like, oh, I don't care that this person is upset that there's no consent, or they might be like, don't worry, once I start raping them, they'll begin to enjoy it, and then I'll get consent sort of after the fact. Or some people are like, yes, I love the fact that they hate this. Those are sort of, but the common thing when it comes to rape, sexual assault, is that there is not consent from everyone. Apparently, though, in the United States, if you're rich, you can get away with it, right? Okay. So, over the years and through academic study, there have been many ways to describe or categorize different types of rapists. But I'd say the MTC R3, or the Massachusetts Treatment Center 3, is probably the most relevant one when you look at rape, sexual assault within the context of serial killing. Okay. Now, we can have a major discourse just on the MTC itself, and frankly, this is a reading intensive course, so you should read up on it for yourself, and there's much the authors of the book have much to say about it. But essentially, they have these 4 main categories or factors of rapists that they've also then revised by adding 4 major motivations for why these 4 groups of people might rape. And that has actually ended up leading to up to almost I think it's 250 different types of subcategories of rapist. And we're obviously not going to cover all those, but we will cover the main 4 and the main motivations why people commit rape, right? So people might be vindictive and rape someone as a sort of a punishment. Some people might do it out of anger. Some people might actually be turned on and enjoy the fact that they're raping someone, while other people are just being opportunistic, which is something that you find oftentimes, when you hear about the rape that occurs in American jails. A lot of that rape can be considered opportunistic. But not all. There's also this power aspect to it. But let's focus on the categories. So the first is the displaced aggression rapist, right? And these people are usually violent in the way that they rape, and there's not really a sexual thing for them here. These people are raping because they are angry. Their anger has taken such a hold of them that they turn into a rapist, right? So yes, there's a level of sexual arousal because, if you're a man raping someone, you have, you need to be aroused for it to work. But it is more of a way to vent rage and anger than it is for sexual gratification, right? And so sometimes most of the time the victim can be a complete stranger, but it's also been found, you can also see this in marriages or in relationships. And there are other things like marks of brutalization, like biting and scratching and slashing, and clothes are usually teared. The assailant will sometimes demand other forms of oral sex or something like that in order to help him get where he needs to be. These men can sometimes be married. That's one thing that they found. They're oftentimes married, and will attack women who display independence. Right. So to think of it, these are really men who have some sort of an issue with independent women. And so they want to bring them down a peg by anger raping them and humiliating them and brutalizing them. Real pieces of work, if you ask me. Then you have your compensatory rapists. These are your true rapists, right? These people are kind of introverted, non-assertive people who plan their victimizations, right? So these are people who want to rape somebody because they want to have sex with that person, right? So they will oftentimes stalk their victim without the victim even knowing. They'll find the right opportunity for it to happen, and they will then rape them. So like did the BTK killer rape? I don't think the BTK killer ever raped anyone, but the BTK killer, if he did, would probably be a compensatory rapist. So these people live in that fantasy world of having sex with someone, and they eventually will then move to acting out on that fantasy by raping that person. So the thing though is that these people are introverted, they're non-assertive. So if the victim fights back enough, the risk will be too much for the compensatory rapist, and they will peace right out. But they are seeking sexual companionship. And for some reason to them, so it's not so much the rape itself that is doing it for them. It is just the fact that they want sex, and for some reason they think the best way to get it is to do it this way. Then you get your sexually aggressive rapists, and these people hold. So these are more sadistic people. They hold the belief that women really do want to be dominated, and that women will really be turned on once they feel them inside of them. Okay, so they feel like, oh, once I start having sex with this woman, she will actually begin to enjoy it because she really does want to dominate it. When she says no, she doesn't really mean it because she actually wants to be dominated, right? He likes the fact that he is in the process of raping a woman. He likes the pain associated with that. So it's very sadistic, right? And obviously, in the end, gets some sort of sexual gratification from the sadism, from the fact that they're hurting someone, right? These people are often the products of childhood disruption of their sexual and or just normal development. Then you get your impulsive rapists, and these are people who, when they see a good opportunity, will take it, right? So the offender might be committing another crime and be like, "Ooh, I'm gonna also commit rape," right? So they don't set out to go rape someone, but they say, "Oh, okay, well, here's a good opportunity to do this," and they will then get on it. Their violence is usually limited. And will just use enough violence to be able to complete the rape. Sorry, I really... this stuff makes me quite annoyed to talk about. I don't have a lot of respect for rapists, and I don't think anyone should, but it's hard for me to talk about this stuff. Yeah. So... Again, some serial killers will have raped someone, and then the best way to eliminate evidence is to kill the person. Other people enjoy the sadism of raping and then also killing someone, while others do it accidentally, or they sort of get so wrapped up into it, or they do it out of aggression and anger.